Deltarune Chapter 5 has been out for a couple weeks and I have opinions, so I'm putting them on the internet for other people to be entertained by and or criticize. This quote-unquote review is going to be full of spoilers, so here's my quick non-spoiled thoughts on the chapter in case you somehow perform the miracle of finding this and clicking on it without having played it. It's good. If you like Deltarune, you've definitely already played this chapter and don't need my recommendation. If you don't like Deltarune, this is more of the same and almost definitely won't change your mind. If you haven't played Deltarune, try out chapters 1 and 2 for free, and then follow the advice from before as it pertains to you. Get it? Got it? Good. Let's move on to the spoilers. And it only feels right that the first thing I talk about is Asgore, considering how central he was to the last Deltarune video I made. No, Asgore is not the Roaring Knight. In my defense, I admitted off rip in that theory that it was a shot from half court. Moving away from things that the chapter didn't do with Asgore's character and onto the things it did, I'm overall pretty happy. I think the game did a fantastic job at demonstrating both the positive and negative aspects of who he is. The way his tunnel-visioned obsession with the Dark Fountain and inability to let go of the past led him to lash out at the Fun Gang and push the flowers away is great storytelling. It showed us the damage his problems can cause from the perspective of someone being affected by them, and for most of the playtime lets us infer how these exact same scenarios must have played out in the past. Then when it was time to confirm what I'd been assuming for most of the chapter, I got to see Asgore's side of the story. And while it didn't excuse his actions, it helped me understand him and made my heart break for him even more than it had before. That final scene where Asgore owns up to his mistakes and resolves to do better going forward is a great encapsulation of what the chapter as a whole does with him. His flaws are front and center throughout the whole thing, but so is everything that makes him a wonderful man. The way he constantly shows concern and care for Chris's well-being while palling around with Flowery is super endearing and lets us know that he has his priorities fairly straight. All the interactions he has with the cast in the Light World are some of the most heartwarming and smile-inducing moments in the game. And of course, we have all the stories that the flowers tell about who Asgore is and how much he held on to his loving and nurturing character, even at his absolute lowest point. And since I've already brought them up, I might as well move on to the rest of the chapter's antagonists. The 6 flowers based on Undertale's human souls were mostly fun characters who did the job they were meant to well. Aqua is easily my favorite. Her goofy personality is just a treat every time she's on screen. She has my favorite boss fight of the 6, and her being the first one to appear meant she had the benefit of being both the one with the most screen time to get me attached to her, and being my introduction to Petal Dance. Aside from her, Seth, Green, and Yellow were all endearing. Blue I honestly don't have any feelings on. I felt like his screen time was too limited to make more of an impression, and Orange I found to be more annoying than anything. The scene where I got to say goodbye to them and they thanked me for helping them live out their dream for a bit, despite the fact that I was the reason they would never do it again, was heart-wrenching and incredibly bittersweet. Ultimately, the flowers did their job at providing roadblocks to play through, some good comedic relief, and genuine emotional attachment. More importantly than all of that though, they were great supporting cast for the real star of the show. Flowery is just the GOAT. When focusing completely on how each antagonist is used in their own chapter, he is possibly surpassing Tenna for my favorite in the game. And when I take Tenna's diminishing returns in chapters 4 and 5 into consideration, Flowery skyrockets to easily my favorite antagonist in the game. I think the thing that really brings this character together is the way his real depth and most lovable traits were slowly drip-fed throughout the whole chapter. When he first appeared, Flowery comes across as a joke character more than anything. I mean, Toby Fox knew what he was doing when he put Aqua's Omega attack in that trailer. So much of the community was convinced this chapter was going to be full of Undertale connections and lore about the soul based on that clip, and Asgore's flowers alone. Then as soon as we got into the Dark World, we were all collectively jump scared by an anime cutscene, and introduced to a guy named Flowey, but with an R. That, combined with his ridiculous voice lines, cartoony visual comedy, and super goofy interactions with the main trio and Asgore, set this character up to be a masterful troll. However, despite starting off as an instrument to mess with the fandom, Flowery begins to shift into a truly incredible character right off the bat. Throughout the first chunk of the Dark World, he holds on to this super friendly persona, but it's clear something else is going on under the surface. Personally, I was sure the chapter was setting up for him to be secretly evil and hiding it behind a smiley facade, but that expectation just set Tricky Tony up for the perfect subversion opportunity to make him the most likable guy in the game. His rivalry with Ralsei is another example of his hidden depth. Initially, it just seems like it's going to be played up for laughs, but as things progress, it becomes a way for us to learn a little more about how the game mechanics work within the context of the world of Deltarune, and Ralsei's connection to it. The conflict between Ralsei and Flowery also serves as another source of tension between Ralsei and Susie, which has been building up since Chapter 3 and feels like it's heading towards another emotional explosion even bigger than the one in Chapter 4. Now, where the first chunk of the Dark World piqued my interest in Flowery on a meta level, the exploration of the castle and climactic finale of the chapter is what brought him to life as a character in his own right and made me fall in love with them. Getting to know the other flowers and their love and admiration for him, witnessing his genuine attempts to make Asgore happy, and seeing him have real heart-to-hearts with the Fun Gang went a long way in helping me really care about this character. And then came the final battle, and it was literally perfect. The dynamic between Flowery and the Fun Game here is easily the most interesting and emotional between all 5 chapters so far. There is no one evil force here. They're 2 groups of people who really have come to care about each other and don't want to fight, but have to if they're going to protect the things that matter to them. Then there's the ideals Flowery represents, which do a good job of making him feel like a real counterpart to the Fun Gang. Deltarune self-describes as a heartfelt journey of humor and friendship. Virtues that Flowery and his petaled companions embody arguably better than the main trio, who are clearly not on the same page and not even close to honest with each other. This is driven home amazingly by Flowery's final attack, where he draws on the power of all of his friends while Chris and the Soul have to run ahead past Susie and Ralsei, and are facing the flowers alone. Finally, Flowery's last stand. In one final attempt to save Asgore, Flowery challenges the Roaring Knight, and loses his life in the process. As heartbreaking as it was, I think having him killed off here was actually the best possible choice for both the overarching story of Deltarune and his character. This being the note we leave the Dark World on helps drive home the point that this really is the last simple and fun adventure we're gonna have, and transitions us into Act 3 perfectly. It also saves Flowery from going through the same fate that I feel like Queen and especially Tenna have. Since the end of their own chapters, those 2 characters have almost become caricatures of themselves. With no more development being given to them, they've kind of lost their dramatic and emotional weight in the current narrative, and are relegated to sitting around in Castletown and being mediums to insert a lot of the fandom referencing and meme-based humor into the game. Since this is where Flowery bites the bullet, I just get to remember him at his best. Seeing as we've already gone over the main antagonists of the chapter, let's get into the protagonists next. What did I think of the Fun Gang in Chapter 5? Well, they were good, but I was a little underwhelmed with their development. What this chapter does with the main trio feels almost entirely like setup, which isn't a bad thing in and of itself, but does stand out when juxtaposed to chapters 1 through 4. And all of those, it felt like the game did a great job balancing setup and payoff. Chapter 1 is the introduction to every character, but also has an arc for Susie that feels good and satisfying all on its own. Chapter 2 similarly does set up for Susie's healing and Noelle's journey, but also has a lot of good forward motion in Susie and Ralsei's relationship, as well as letting us more in on who Chris is and giving Noelle something that would be a solid conclusion to her arc if it had ended there. Chapter 3 starts with a big shakeup to the party's dynamic and continues diving into Chris's character. As for Chapter 4, do I really need to explain why this was big for the 3 main characters' development? In comparison to what came before, Chapter 5 just feels like it doesn't do a ton to push the Fun Gang forward as a trio. I do think the stuff they're setting up is really good. As I mentioned earlier, they're clearly moving towards another Chapter 4 style explosion within the group, only this time more spectacular. Every member of the trio seems to have a different interest in mind, and Susie is the only one not aware of it. Chris and Ralsei clearly have a lot they're both hiding, some of it being from just Susie and some of it being from us the player. Beyond that, the chapter is clearly bringing up some fresh tension between Susie and Ralsei through their collective and individual interactions with Flowery and Orange. Conflict is clearly brewing in the group, and while that will definitely have big ramifications in the last 2 chapters, I do still wish there was a little bit of payoff in it for this one. Let's take a minute to step away from story and character stuff for a bit and focus all in on gameplay. To get it out of the way quickly, let's talk about the regular bullet hell RPG battles in this chapter. Overall, the normal enemies worked really well for me. They felt like a good progression of difficulty, especially after I worked the rust off from the long break between playing. None of those regular enemies from the chapter stood out as particularly fun to fight, aside from Netsuki, whose gimmick of copying older bullet patterns I really enjoyed. As for the boss fights, there are only 4 I want to give my thoughts on right now. The trashy trio fight was really fun with some solid humor. I will say it was surprisingly hard at first for being the first fight I did after not playing the game for half a year. Aqua's first fight was great. It provided a good challenge and was an amazing introduction to her character, and the other flowers by extension. On the other hand, I really did not like the fight with Blue and Yellow. Don't get me wrong, I love any Ace Attorney reference off virtue of existing, but I felt like in execution, the fight's gimmick was more guesswork than logic puzzle. And the ending Flowery fight was an easy top 5 boss in all of Deltarune so far. Probably top 3 for me. No, I did not forget about the secret boss, that's coming later in the video. And if there's anything else you want my thoughts on, if they haven't been talked about yet or aren't the secret boss, I have no thoughts. Completely neutral. That's enough of the main combat mechanics of the game as a whole though. We all know that's not the standout from this chapter. Let's talk about the feather. This edition has me craving a Toby Fox platformer or Metroidvania. The way acting was incorporated into this part worked really well. The way new mechanics and interactions were paced out over the course of the chapter was amazing. Difficulty was ramped up in a completely fair-feeling way, and despite the simple controls and limited moves, it never once got boring. Nothing else to say about this mechanic other than it's great. I also want to take a minute to appreciate the design of this Dark World from a strictly gameplay perspective. I am so happy they opted to return to the design philosophy from chapters 1 and 2. Don't get me wrong, I think the Dark Worlds from chapters 3 and 4 have a lot to offer, especially on the thematic, narrative, and stylistic fronts, but they never really replicated the sense of exploration and adventure I got from the first 2 chapters. Chapter 5, on the other hand, takes what the early parts of the game did and just does it again, but bigger, better, and with a lot of the improvements and new elements that made Chapter 3 and 4 so good. The callback-heavy theming of the Garden of Hopes and Dreams fits perfectly with the narrative threads of Asgore's inability to move on from the past and Flowery weaponizing his nostalgia. The mountainous ascent to Flower Castle does a lot of great things with the feather mechanic and has a great momentum. The Flower Castle itself puts Card Castle and Queen's Mansion to shame with how sprawling it is. And of course, the top of the castle was so hype and climactic I was practically standing up and shouting. The best part is, every single area feels completely distinct from each other. My favorite Dark World in the game, and it's not even a comparison. Come to think of it, this video has been pretty much entirely focused on the Dark World, so why don't we take a bit to talk about the festival and the Light World. Overall, I think it was good. The interactions between all the characters were super fun and the vibes were incredible. My biggest takeaway here is that it fixes my biggest problem with the Light World section from Chapter 4. Where that is going to take you a while whether you interact with all the optional stuff or not, the festival feels like it could be gotten through fairly quickly on a replay, where you're already familiar with the story and just want to get to the action. And then there's the beach scene. Look, I'm just going to be blunt with y'all, and if anyone watching watched to the end of my Asgore theory, you probably know where I'm going with this already. I am fully bought in on Jesus Christ. He is my savior. I've acknowledged that and I'm putting all my eggs in his basket. I also believe, because of how clearly it is made in his word, that God made man and woman distinct, and that anything related to sex is only good in the confines of marriage, that romance should only be done in marriage or in the pursuit of it, and that marriage, and by extension, romance and sex, is designed to be between one man and one woman only. All that is to say, I'm not a fan of the Susie and Noelle stuff, or the other things like it in the game. With all that being said, I still think there's a glaring flaw in the writing of this scene that comes even when looking at it from a secular perspective. I know it can be easy to feel like these characters have spent ages together because in the real world it's almost been 8 years since Chapter 1 released, but in the world of the game, that is not the case. Chapter 5 takes place on the 4th day after Chapter 1. About half a week before the festival, Susie was shoving Chris into the locker. And while I fully believe she can grow and learn to accept love from certain people in that time, especially in the context of a game where these things have to be sped up, there's a point where my suspension of disbelief breaks. Development and all, I just have a really hard time believing Susie is already in a place where she's ready to say most of the things she does in this scene. Or even that Susie as a person would say most of the things she does in this scene. This problem is not exclusive to the beach moment, mind you. I feel the exact same way about her speech at the end of Chapter 3 and some of the things she says in Chapter 4. I'm also not calling Susie a bad character in any way, shape, or form. I love her. Her development and dramatic moments hit far more than they miss, and I'd also argue that her goofy and comedic moments have never missed once. This is just an issue with the game that's been bugging me since I first played Chapters 3 and 4. And on that negative note, I actually have one more segment that's going to be mostly complaining before I go back to glazing at the end, so just bear with me here. I think that Chapter 5 has the weakest secret boss fight of the game, the weakest quest to get there in the game, and while I like the character we fight more than whatever the vague posty gaster-coded BS Chapter 3 threw at me was, Pink does not even come close to touching Jevil, Spam 10, and Gerson for me. Felt like every other chapter did a great job building suspense and anticipation for who you were going to be fighting, but this one just left me wanting in that regard. I get that it was intentionally being subversive from what we expect for a Shadow Crystal boss, and maybe I'm the problem here and just need to be more open to change, but I don't like that this is what's getting subverted. I adore how dramatic and narratively rich the other four were, and Chapter 5 opting to ditch that, not completely, because there was still some good dramatic stuff with Pink, but mostly ditch that for subversion is just something I'm not personally a fan of. As for the fight itself, I'm also not a big fan. Feels like the entire internet already knows how evil the bomb attack is, so I'll skip it, but I also take issue with that perspective shift attack where you have to move forward. It's awesome in concept, but in execution, and maybe this is just me again, the depth perception was really hard to grasp, and leading to some damage that felt really cheap. I did like the dating sim attack though. That was super creative and genuinely enjoyable to figure out. Now that that's over, I promised y'all some more glaze, so let's talk about the presentation. Because Timmy absolutely cooked with this chapter. While I don't think anything here surpasses the quality of the Titan being born in Chapter 4, it is constantly operating on a level that comes dangerously close. From the sunrise over the mountains, to every segment where you're dashing forward, the mythical feeling of the gardens on the first area, and of course, everything on the roof of the castle, this chapter genuinely had my jaw on the floor. I don't think a game has managed to give me this much awe off of its visual flair and style alone since Persona 5. And just so we're clear, speaking about anything in the same breath as Persona 5 is one of the greatest compliments I could ever give. Then all of that is topped off masterfully by the soundtrack, because, shock of all shocks, Toby Fox made good music. In other news, swimming seems to be linked with drowning. Finally, to close us off, it makes sense that I talk about the ending of the chapter, which went in an interesting direction I was not expecting. Every other chapter of Deltarune is closed off in a way that filled me with some form or varying degree of dread, fear, or despair. And they've only trended more and more extreme in putting a pit in my stomach as the game has gone on. So naturally, I expected the ending of Chapter 5, which was coming off the death of a character I loved and is supposedly leading us into the game's final act, to bury me in edginess. But it did the opposite instead. Chapter 5 ends with a cheerful montage of Susie and all our Darkner friends in Castletown preparing to welcome Noelle into the party officially. Chapter 5 ends on a happy and hopeful note, and to be completely honest, that only makes me worry more about whatever these characters are going to be put through next. Thanks for watching, and before you go, I want to tell you that Psalm 51, verses 3 through 6 say, "For I know my transgressions and my sin is ever before me. Against you, you only, have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, you delight in truth, in the inward being, and you teach me wisdom in the secret heart." Last time, we talked about the importance of David opening this psalm with the focus being on God's mercy, and how that is the only reason repentance is possible. Well, now in this second section, he's moved on from what makes it possible to repent to the much more unfortunate topic of why it's necessary. Our sin. We are a sinful people. And in our flesh, we have a sinful nature, and we choose to give into it all the time, just like David did before this. The step of acknowledgement taken here is so important, because how can any of us hope to turn away from our wrongdoing and move forward when we're refusing to even admit that a wrong has been done? To me, though, the biggest standouts of the passage are the back half of verse 4 and all of verse 6, where David speaks about things about God being blameless and delighting in truth. This reminds me of how we can only see how bad our sin truly is when we look to God, and how seeing that evil for what it is further reveals how good God truly is. That's all I have for now. Thank you all so much for watching, especially to this point. If you did, you're a goat. Until next time, I'm the Howard Historian, and I'm gonna go touch grass. See ya.